With Remake and Rebirth now available, we've only got one last part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project to play, and with the game still a few years away from its release, we have a couple of big developer statements to go through to help shed some light as to what kinds of DLC Final Fantasy VII Rebirth may be getting, in addition to what we may see going forward in the third and final game to wrap up this ambitious trilogy. The third game is already very much underway, with significant work already having been done to the title, of which we reported in this previous video here, linked in the description and at the end of the video. And this video is an extension of just that, a continuation of more hints that helps us paint a clearer picture of what we are likely to see in the final game of the trilogy. There will be some spoilers regarding locations and story elements from the original PS1 game from 1997 towards the end of this video, and I will make sure to address those sections with spoiler warnings. So if you are especially sensitive to the original PS1 game, haven't played it, or don't want insight into what we are likely to see in Remake Part 3, this definitely is not the video for you. When Final Fantasy VII Remake launched in 2020, it came a half a year shy of when the PS5 launched, making Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade in the Intermission DLC chapter featuring Yuffie in 2021 to be the perfect package to release on the PS5 to take advantage of the new hardware and give us a glimpse at what the future Final Fantasy VII Remake installments may look like on the platform. The game also saw its release on PC in 2021 as well, and while this awesome look into Yuffie's events in Midgar and its expansion of the ending of Remake generated even more hype and simultaneously bewilderment as to where the second game, ultimately named Rebirth, would take us, it seems like Rebirth may not follow in the footsteps of the game before it with its approach to DLC, as DLC seems to be out of the question for Rebirth. In an exclusive interview with Spanish-language outlet Vandal in September 2023, creative director Tetsuya Nomura stated that the team at Square has no plans to release DLC for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, with Nomura stating, quote, "We are not planning any DLC for this entry. Remake's episode Intermission DLC with Yuffie made great sense with its introduction to Yuffie as a character that would accompany the party in Rebirth, and I gotta say, I was half expecting Square to repeat this trend with Rebirth by giving us DLC about Cid or Vincent, but it looks like Square has, at least publicly, shot down any hopes that Rebirth may be getting some DLC to help shorten the wait between Rebirth and whatever the third game will be called. Real quick, if Rebirth were to get some DLC, what do you think it will be about? My money's on Vincent Valentine, expanding on his introduction by exploring his history, as he is a character integral to some of the earlier moments of the greater Final Fantasy VII storyline that could be expanded on in DLC. It could also be explored just as it was in the original PS1 game in Part 3, but with the developers stating Rocket Town is very much happening in Part 3, my bet is on Vincent getting more screen time before Part 3 launches, considering if the team even does DLC for Rebirth, which they stated they don't have plans for. It is worth noting that Final Fantasy XVI producer Naoki Yoshida mirrored a similar statement prior to Final Fantasy XVI's release, stating that no DLC for Final Fantasy XVI was being planned, but here we are, not even a year after 16 released, and the second DLC for that game is only a few weeks away from releasing. Even so, the team working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake projects are very different, and it may be true that we just may not get any DLC whatsoever for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, just as they stated, as it is likely that the team is going full steam ahead with its development on Remake Part 3, as evidence from the numerous statements from several interviews indicating that the team has already made a lot of progress on the third game. Here's just a quick summary of everything we know about the development of the third game to catch you all up. We know that Rocket Town will be featured in Part 3, along with a greatly expanded Wutai, in addition to a fully operational high-wind airship and complete traversal around the world map. With much of the world map having already been made in Rebirth, much of the development on the third game has already been completed, since Part 3, which follows Disc 2 and 3 of the original, gives players full access to the world map. We'll get into that in greater detail later on in this video, but before that, we have more developer remarks over potential DLC or an expansion, if you will, and this time, it surrounds one of the minigames. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth introduced a ton of minigames, with one of the highlights without a doubt being the robust Queen's Blood card game. Due to the minigame's great reception from fans and critics alike, one of the developers remarked about the possibility of seeing the game further expanded, not just in the third game, but in some sort of expansion. In an interview with Red Bull, Rebirth game director Naoki Hamaguchi stated that due to the positive feedback with Queen's Blood, that he is open to the idea of expanding on the game with future expansions. We haven't decided anything in terms of future development for Queen's Blood, Hamaguchi states, but so far, the media who played it have provided very positive feedback on it, so we want to consider further expansions as a possibility. It's no denying that Queen's Blood has gotten so much love from both fans and critics alike, and that it may be a possibility that we could see this minigame transcend the game to where it becomes its own standalone game, similar to that of The Witcher 3's Gwent. But even so, just hearing that Hamaguchi may be entertaining the possibility of seeing Queen's Blood become bigger is a start, and leads to a number of implications down the road. The aforementioned standalone game for Queen's Blood, similar to Gwent, could be an option here, but seeing as Remake Part 3 is being developed, it's pretty clear that, and let me know whether or not you agree, that we will be seeing Queen's Blood in Part 3 for sure. With that game a few years off, it's not far-fetched to see Queen's Blood getting some sort of update, adding more cards past the current 145 on offer, plus new mechanics and tournaments being added that can spice up this minigame even more for Part 3. I don't necessarily think we'll be getting more Queen's Blood expansions for Rebirth for that reason alone, but if there were to be an expansion, perhaps a free update to the game involving more matches or a small extension to the existing questline could be done. So, two things. 1. Are you a fan of Queen's Blood? And 2. Do you think we will see more of it in Rebirth, or will that be better saved for Part 3? Definitely let me know your thoughts about this in the comments, but if there's anything to know about the future of Queen's Blood, it is for sure going to be resurfacing, and will likely be expanded on in Part 3 due to its success here in Rebirth. Alright, so DLC, whether on a scale like episode intermission or a simple Queen's Blood expansion, may or may not be hitting Rebirth, but we all know that Remake Part 3 is going to be absolutely massive, and we are going to dive into that speculation of where Part 3 will take us in this last part of the video, culminating in what I'm thinking may very well be Part 3's Proto-Relic storyline. Definitely know that there will be spoilers pertaining to the original PS1 game going forward, so just know what you're getting into from here on out. With Disc 2 and Disc 3 of the PS1 game being the blueprint for which Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 is going to follow, we already know from previous interviews that Rocket Town, this massive region here in the northwest of the Western continent, is going to play a big role in Part 3, along with Wutai, which is especially massive, both in landmass and also in its importance to the story this time around. What was once a completely optional area of the original Final Fantasy VII, we have Square now telling us that Wutai will be playing a much larger role in Part 3, now that it is at war with Shinra. While we do not have an accurate look at what the rest of the world map looks like for Remake Part 3, we do get a hint at the map found here when Shinra was broadcasting Junon Celebration commemorating Rufus Shinra as the new head of the company. Yeah, it's definitely pixelated, but you betcha I'm gonna use this to highlight the key areas that Part 3 will take us to. We explored much of this in great detail in my previous video, again, linked in the description and at the end of this video. But we are no doubt going to have access to the Great Glacier region, featuring Icicle Inn and the Crater, along with Rocket Town here, the massive country of Wutai out west, and I wouldn't be surprised if they break this up into 2 regions due to its size, but we'll consider Wutai its own region for now. On top of that, we have Mideel and the islands out here to the southeast of the eastern continent, including this, which appears to be Fort Condor, of which is of major importance in Disc 2 of the original game, and up in the northeast, we have Round Island, also featured here. Big shout out to Final Fan TV for merging the landmasses from the original game's map into the current world map that we have in Rebirth, as his work helps paint a greater picture for what Part 3's map could end up being. Because Remake Part 3 will likely give us the option to return to every previous region in Rebirth, of which there are 7 regions when counting the Meridian Ocean, the new regions introduced in Part 3 being Rocket Town, the Great Glacier region, Wutai, Mideel, the underwater region with the submarine, and the sky as introduced with the Highwind, this gives us a total of 13 different regions we may be able to explore. That number 13 is an important one. No, not Final Fantasy 13, but something that will likely serve as the Proto-Relic quest for Part 3. Have you figured it out already? I'm talking about none other than Knights of the Round. Found here in the northeastern part of the world map, known as Round Island, this island will likely be accessible after obtaining all 13 proto-relics across the entirety of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, culminating in a showdown with the legendary Knights of the Round that we are for sure going to be able to get. With this summon materia being such a memorable part of the original game for those who took the time to breed a gold chocobo to get it, there's no way the developers are going to just pass this up. In the previous video, we discussed whether chocobo breeding would be in Part 3, and well, I honestly just don't see it happening, even though it would be so awesome to see. Because Round Island was only accessible by gold chocobo in the original, as even the Highwind was unable to land there, I think access will be granted to us should we complete the proto-relic quests in all, maybe 13, regions for Part 3. Definitely let me know your thoughts about that in the comments, and whether you think the Knights of the Round are going to be tied to proto-relic missions in Part 3. Just know there may very well be less or even more regions than just 13 in Part 3, but the point stands that Gilgamesh was Rebirth's proto-relic quest that unearthed more of the Meridian Ocean, that perhaps Round Island may only be accessible by Sky next time in Part 3 for the Sky region's proto-relic mission. So when looking at the totality of what Part 3 may encompass, just solely going off of Disc 2 and Disc 3 of the original game, we have the Great Glacier region, Rocket Town, Wutai, Mideel, the underwater region containing the underwater reactor, the sunken Gelnica, and the Emerald Weapon, and the Sky region that may be host to Round Island, of which may only be accessible by Sky this time around. On top of that, we have Bone Village that wasn't present in Rebirth, along with the potential to explore more fully the Temple of the Ancients, as the story has us return there later on in the original game, perhaps even going to the Ancient Forest as well. We will of course be going back to Junon for some gripping, face-slapping action, returning to Cosmo Canyon for Bugenhagen, and parachuting into Midgar. And with new events that are likely to take place during Part 3, I'm pretty sure there are big reasons to visit the other areas from Rebirth as well. It's no doubt that Remake Part 3 is going to be an absolutely massive game, and while the wait may be a few years off, I'm still thinking it's going to be a 2027 release in time for the 30th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII. Definitely be sure to stay tuned to the channel for all updates pertaining to Remake Part 3, and watch this video going into thorough detail regarding all developer interviews shedding light on what we can expect from Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, and I look forward to seeing all you good people real soon in the next one.